In today's episode of Brain Fee Lab, we're looking at the 10 deadliest aviation accidents in history. Let's explore what went wrong and how these incidents reshaped air travel safety. Number 10. The Pan Am Flight 103 disaster was a catastrophic terrorist attack that occurred on December 21, 1988. The Boeing 747, known as Clipper, made of the seas, was en route from London Heathrow Airport to Newark International Airport when it was destroyed by a bomb over Lockerbie, Scotland. This tragedy claimed the lives of all 259 people on board and 11 residents on the ground. Pan Am Flight 103 departed from London Heathrow at 6:25 p.m. GMT on December 21, 1988. The flight was scheduled to arrive in Newark, New Jersey at approximately 6 p.m. EST. At approximately 7:02 p.m. GMT, as the aircraft was flying at about 31,000 feet over Lockerbie, a bomb concealed within a suitcase exploded in the forward cargo hold of the aircraft. The explosion resulted in a rapid decompression of the cabin, causing the plane to break apart in midair. The impact of the blast sent debris falling across the town of Lockerbie. The explosion and subsequent debris caused significant damage on the ground, killing 11 residents of Lockerbie and damaging several houses. The wreckage of the plane fell over a wide area, with parts landing in fields and streets near the town. Emergency responders quickly arrived at the crash site to assist with search and rescue operations. Recovery efforts were hampered by the sheer scale of the disaster and the spread of debris. The local community rallied to assist with the response, providing support to first responders and those affected. The bombing generated extensive media coverage, as it was one of the first major acts of terrorism involving a commercial airliner. News outlets from around the world reported on the event, focusing on the tragic loss of life and the implications for international security. Investigators determined that the bomb had been planted by members of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, General Command, in collaboration with the Libyan Intelligence Service. The bomb was constructed using plastic explosives and a timer, and it was hidden in a suitcase placed in the cargo hold. In 1991, two Libyan intelligence officers, Abdelbasset al-Megrahi and Layman Khalifa Fhimah, were identified as the main suspects in the bombing. They were charged with murder and conspiracy, and an extradition request was made to the Libyan government, which refused to cooperate. After years of diplomatic negotiations, the trial for the two suspects took place in a specially convened Scottish court in the Netherlands. In January 2001, al-Megrahi was found guilty of the bombing and sentenced to 27 years to life in prison. In 2009, al-Megrahi was later released on compassionate grounds due to terminal cancer, which drew widespread criticism and outrage, especially from the families of the victims. Number 9. American Airlines Flight 191 was one of the deadliest aviation accidents in U.S. history, occurring on May 25, 1979. The disaster claimed the lives of all 271 passengers and crew on board, as well as 2 people on the ground. Flight 191 was a regularly scheduled American Airlines flight from Chicago O'Hare to Los Angeles. The aircraft involved was a McDonnell Douglas DC-10, a wide-body jet with a strong safety record up until that point. On the afternoon of May 25, 1979, Flight 191 began its takeoff from runway 32 or at Chicago O'Hare International Airport. On board were 258 passengers, including several children and 13 crew members. As the aircraft was speeding down the runway, about 6,000 feet into its takeoff roll, the number 1 engine, along with its pylon assembly, completely detached from the wing. The engine flipped over the wing, damaging the leading edge of the left wing as it came off. In addition to losing the engine, this caused a rupture in the hydraulic lines and damage to crucial control systems on the aircraft. Despite the engine loss, the flight crew was unaware of the full extent of the damage and proceeded with the takeoff. The DC-10's design was capable of flying with only 2 of its 3 engines, so losing 1 engine alone would not have been catastrophic. However, the loss of hydraulic systems and the damage to the wing's leading-edge slats caused more severe problems. The aircraft crashed into a field just outside the airport, in a trailer park and light industrial area. Upon impact, the DC-10 exploded, creating a massive fireball. All 271 people on board died instantly, and 2 workers on the ground were also killed. The crash site was a horrific scene, with debris scattered over a wide area and a large fire fueled by the plane's fuel tanks. First responders arrived quickly, but the devastation was so severe that there were no survivors to rescue. The wreckage burned for hours, and identification of victims took a significant amount of time due to the extent of the destruction. Number 8. The Iran Air Flight 655 disaster occurred on July 3, 1988, when Iran Air Flight 655 was shot down by the U.S. Navy guided missile cruiser USS Vincennes over the Persian Gulf. This tragic incident resulted in the deaths of all 290 passengers and crew members on board and remains a significant event in both aviation history and U.S.-Iran relations. Iran Air Flight 655 was scheduled to fly from Tehran to Dubai on the evening of July 3, 1988. The flight was uneventful until it reached the airspace over the Persian Gulf. The incident occurred during a period of heightened tensions between the United States and Iran following the Iran-Iraq War. The U.S. had deployed naval forces in the Persian Gulf to protect oil shipping lanes and enforce sanctions against Iran. The U.S. military was on high alert for Iranian attacks and had recently been involved in multiple confrontations with Iranian vessels. As Flight 655 ascended to its cruising altitude, it was operating on a regular commercial flight path. The aircraft was cleared to fly in a civilian corridor over the Persian Gulf, and it was communicating with air traffic control as it approached its destination. At approximately 10:17 a.m. local time, USS Vincennes, commanded by Captain William C. Rogers III, was patrolling the Persian Gulf when it detected what it believed to be an incoming hostile aircraft. The ship's radar systems misidentified the A-300 as a military threat, specifically thinking it was an Iranian F-14 fighter jet. Captain Rogers decided to engage, launching 2 surface-to-air missiles at the aircraft. Within a few moments, Flight 655 was struck by one of the missiles. The plane was completely destroyed and crashed into the sea, killing all aboard. U.S. forces immediately began search and rescue operations in the area. However, debris from the aircraft and human remains were scattered across a large area of the Persian Gulf. Iranian naval vessels also participated in the search efforts. The investigation found that the USS Vincennes did not follow proper protocols for identifying civilian aircraft before engaging. According to military procedures, the crew should have positively identified the aircraft before launching an attack. Technical issues with the ship's radar and fire control systems contributed to the misidentification. The system was designed to track and engage fast-moving military targets, but struggled to correctly interpret the flight path and altitude of a commercial airliner. Number 7. Malaysia Airlines Flight MH17 was tragically shot down on July 17, 2014, while flying over eastern Ukraine, resulting in the deaths of all 298 people on board. MH17 was an international passenger flight from Amsterdam Schiphol Airport to Kuala Lumpur International Airport. It was flying over the Donetsk region of Ukraine, an area embroiled in conflict between Ukrainian forces and Russian-backed separatists, when it was struck by a surface-to-air missile. MH17 departed Amsterdam at 12:31 p.m. local time. The flight was scheduled to cross Eastern Europe and Asia to reach Kuala Lumpur. It followed an approved air route that passed over eastern Ukraine, where conflict had been ongoing for months. Prior to the incident, many airlines had already chosen to avoid this region due to safety concerns, though the airspace at the altitude MH17 was flying was still open at the time. At around 4:20 p.m. local time, the aircraft was hit by a surface-to-air missile while flying at cruising altitude over the war-torn Donetsk region. The missile struck the aircraft's forward section, causing the plane to break apart in midair. The cockpit and fuselage separated from each other, and debris was scattered over a wide area. The impact killed all passengers and crew instantly. The wreckage of MH17 fell across several kilometers of farmland and villages near the town of Rabov in the Donetsk Oblast. Local residents and emergency workers, many of whom were pro-Russian separatists, were the first to arrive at the crash site. The area was soon cordoned off by the separatists, and international access to the site was delayed for days due to ongoing fighting in the region. The investigation confirmed that MH17 was destroyed by a Buk surface-to-air missile. This type of missile is a medium-range system developed by Russia and used by various military forces, including the Russian military and pro-Russian separatists in Ukraine. The missile was launched from an area controlled by separatist forces at the time. The missile was fired from a location near the village of Pervomaisky, in an area under the control of pro-Russian separatists. The Buk missile launcher was part of a convoy that had crossed into Ukraine from Russia and returned to Russia after the incident. Number 6. Saudi Arabian Airlines Flight 163 was involved in one of the deadliest aviation disasters on record, occurring on August 19, 1980. This tragic accident involved a Lockheed L-1011 TriStar and resulted in the deaths of all 301 people on board. The disaster is particularly notable because all passengers and crew survived the initial emergency landing but perished shortly afterward due to a lack of a timely evacuation. The aircraft was on a domestic flight within Saudi Arabia from the capital Riyadh to the coastal city of Jeddah. Shortly after takeoff from Riyadh International Airport, while climbing to cruising altitude, the crew received warnings of a fire in the aft cargo compartment. The warning was triggered by smoke detectors in the rear section of the plane. This compartment housed both luggage and some of the aircraft's technical equipment. Upon receiving the fire alarm, the pilots decided to return to Riyadh for an emergency landing. Captain Mohammed Ali Kawaider, the commander of the flight, reported the situation to air traffic control, and the crew began to prepare for a return to the airport. However, there were several critical delays. The crew spent several minutes troubleshooting the fire alarms, trying to determine whether the fire was real or a false alarm. Despite the fire warnings, the decision to shut down the cabin pressurization system was delayed, which allowed the fire to continue spreading. Approximately 35 minutes after takeoff, the aircraft landed back at Riyadh Airport at 21:06 local time. Despite smoke filling the cabin and the increasing severity of the fire, the aircraft made a safe touchdown. All 301 people on board were still alive at this point. For unclear reasons, Captain Kawaider did not immediately order an evacuation after landing. Instead, he taxied the aircraft for several minutes on the runway before finally coming to a stop about 2 minutes and 40 seconds after touchdown. Once the aircraft stopped, the evacuation process was further delayed. There was no visible attempt to open the doors or initiate an emergency evacuation. Ground crews could see flames and smoke coming from the rear of the aircraft, but were unable to board due to the heat and dense smoke. By the time they could access the plane, no one on board had survived. Fire overwhelms the aircraft. It is believed that during the post-landing period, the fire continued to spread throughout the cabin, producing toxic smoke and intense heat. The exact cause of death for the passengers and crew was determined to be asphyxiation from smoke inhalation rather than fire burns. The fire destroyed the cabin's interior, and by the time rescue crews managed to open the doors, all 301 people had succumbed to the smoke and heat inside the aircraft. Number 5. Air India Flight 182 was the target of a terrorist bombing on June 23, 1985, resulting in the deaths of all 329 people on board. The bombing remains one of the worst terrorist attacks in history involving a commercial aircraft until the 9/11 attacks in 2001. The incident, often referred to as the Air India bombing, was part of a larger conspiracy that included another failed bombing attempt on the same day. The aircraft was on a scheduled transatlantic flight from Montreal to Delhi, with a stopover in London Heathrow, while Flight 182 was flying over the Atlantic Ocean, south of the coast of Ireland. At an altitude of 31,000 feet, a bomb concealed in the forward cargo hold of the Boeing 747 exploded at 8:14 a.m. The explosion caused the aircraft to break apart midair, sending it plunging into the Atlantic Ocean near the southwestern coast of Ireland. All 329 people on board were killed. Many of the passengers were families, including a large number of children. The debris and bodies were scattered over a wide area, making recovery efforts extremely difficult. Search and rescue teams were dispatched, but no survivors were found. The bomb was likely intended to detonate when the plane was over London, but due to a flight delay, it exploded over the Atlantic Ocean. The explosion caused catastrophic decompression, disintegration of the fuselage, and the immediate death of all passengers and crew. On the same day, another bomb, intended for a second Air India Flight 301, detonated at Narita Airport, Japan, killing 2 baggage handlers. This bomb was in a suitcase that was supposed to be transferred to an Air India flight from Tokyo to Bangkok. However, due to the timing of the explosion, it detonated before being loaded onto the aircraft. This bombing attempt was linked to the same group behind the Flight 182 attack. The investigation into the bombing of Flight 182 revealed that the attack was planned and executed by Sikh extremists based in Canada, who sought revenge against the Indian government for the Operation Blue Star attack on the Golden Temple in Amritsar in 1984. The bomb was hidden in a suitcase that had been checked in at Vancouver International Airport for a connecting flight in Toronto. From Toronto, the suitcase was transferred to Air India Flight 182 in Montreal without the passenger boarding the flight, a violation of basic security protocols. The explosive device was made using a barometric pressure-triggered bomb, designed to explode at a specific altitude. It was placed in the forward cargo hold of the Boeing 747, causing massive structural damage when it exploded. Canadian authorities had intelligence warnings about potential terrorist activities targeting Air India flights, but they failed to act on these warnings adequately. Both Canada and India were aware of the threats posed by Sikh extremist groups at the time, but security protocols were lax and critical opportunities to prevent the attack were missed. The only person convicted in connection with the bombing, Riyat, was found guilty of helping to build the bomb and was sentenced to 15 years in prison for manslaughter. He later received additional time for perjury after lying during the trials of other suspects. Number 4. Turkish Airlines Flight 981, also known as the unimaginable air disaster, occurred on March 3, 1974, when a McDonnell Douglas DC-10 operated by Turkish Airlines crashed shortly after takeoff from Orly Airport near Paris, France. The disaster resulted in the deaths of 346 people, making it the deadliest aviation accident in the world at the time and one of the worst accidents involving a DC-10. The aircraft was on the second leg of its route from Istanbul to London, with a stopover in Paris. Turkish Airlines Flight 981 took off from Orly Airport at around 12:30 p.m. local time, heading towards London Heathrow Airport. Shortly after departure, as the aircraft was climbing through 11,000 feet, it experienced a sudden and catastrophic failure. The rear left cargo door of the DC-10, which had not been properly latched, blew off during the climb. This led to a rapid decompression of the fuselage. The explosive decompression caused a portion of the cabin floor above the cargo hold to collapse, severing critical control cables that connected the cockpit to the tailplane, elevators, and rudder of the aircraft. With the control cables severed, the pilots were unable to control the aircraft's tail surfaces, making it impossible to stabilize or maneuver the aircraft. The loss of the cargo door also created a massive hole in the fuselage, worsening the situation. As a result, the DC-10 entered a steep, uncontrolled dive. The aircraft, descending rapidly, crashed into the Ermenonville forest, located about 37 kilometers northeast of Paris. The impact was so severe that the aircraft was completely destroyed, and all 346 people aboard were killed instantly. The crash site was a forested area. The investigation into the crash, conducted by French authorities and supported by experts from around the world, quickly focused on the cargo door of the DC-10 as the primary cause of the disaster. The investigation revealed that the ground crew at Orly Airport had not properly latched the cargo door. The faulty design allowed the door to appear latched, even though the locking mechanisms were not fully engaged. When the cabin pressure increased during the climb, the improperly latched door gave way. Number 3. Saudi Arabian Airlines Flight 763 was involved in one of the deadliest aviation accidents in history, a mid-air collision with Kazakhstan Airlines Flight 1907. The collision occurred on November 12, 1996, over the village of Charki Dadri in Haryana, India. The incident resulted in the deaths of all 349 people on board both aircraft, making it the third deadliest aviation disaster and the deadliest mid-air collision to date. The Saudi Arabian Airlines Flight 763 was departing from Delhi, while Kazakhstan Airlines Flight 1907 was descending for arrival at the same airport. Air traffic control had instructed Saudi Flight 763 to climb to an altitude of 14,000 feet, while Kazakhstan Airlines Flight 1907 was instructed to descend to 15,000 feet. However, the Kazakhstan aircraft descended below its assigned altitude to 14,500 feet, violating the separation rules between aircraft. The cockpit crew of the Kazakhstan Airlines flight did not properly follow the ATC instructions, possibly due to communication difficulties and lack of fluency in English. The Kazakhstan Ilyushin IL-76 descended further, coming into the path of the Saudi Arabian Airlines Boeing 747, which was at 14,000 feet. At approximately 6:40 p.m. local time, the two planes collided in the air. The tail of the Kazakhstan Airlines IL-76 struck the left wing of the Saudi Boeing 747, causing both planes to rapidly break apart and crash near the village of Charki Dadri, about 70 kilometers west of Delhi. The Saudi Arabian Boeing 747 disintegrated in midair. The Kazakhstan Airlines IL-76 suffered catastrophic damage and also crashed soon after. All 349 people on both planes were killed. This included 312 passengers and crew aboard the Saudi Arabian Airlines Flight 763 and 37 passengers and crew aboard the Kazakhstan Airlines Flight 1907. Up to this date, the disaster is considered the worst mid-air collision in aviation history. Number 2. The Japan Airlines Flight 123 disaster, which occurred on August 12, 1985, is the deadliest single-aircraft accident in aviation history. The crash involved a Boeing 747 SR-46 and resulted in the deaths of 520 people, with only 4 survivors. The flight was a scheduled domestic route from Tokyo's Haneda Airport to Osaka International Airport. The flight was carrying 524 people, 15 crew members, and 509 passengers. On August 12, 1985, during flight, the rear pressure bulkhead ruptured due to the improper repair, leading to an explosive decompression of the cabin. The loss of pressure caused the vertical stabilizer to be torn off, and several of the aircraft's hydraulic systems, which control key flight surfaces like the rudder and elevators, were destroyed. With all hydraulic systems disabled, the pilots had limited control of the aircraft. They were able to keep the plane in the air for an additional 32 minutes by using engine thrust and some rudimentary control, but the plane was mostly uncontrollable. The flight made erratic movements over the mountains of central Japan before eventually crashing into the Mount Takamagura area. The crash site was located in a remote mountainous area, which made rescue efforts extremely difficult. Although Japanese military helicopters spotted the wreckage shortly after the crash, rescue teams were delayed until the next morning as officials believed no one would have survived the impact. This decision likely cost the lives of more survivors, as several passengers were initially found alive but later succumbed to their injuries. Out of the 524 people on board, only 4 survived. These survivors were seated in the rear section of the aircraft. Number 1. The Tenerife Airport disaster, which occurred on March 27, 1977, remains the deadliest aviation accident in history. It involved 2 Boeing 747 jumbo jets, one operated by KLM and the other by Pan American World Airways, colliding on the runway at Los Rodeos Airport in the Canary Islands. The disaster claimed 583 lives. Both planes were originally bound for Gran Canaria Airport, but a terrorist bomb explosion at the airport forced many flights to be diverted to Los Rodeos, a smaller and less equipped airport. The sudden influx of planes at Los Rodeos caused significant congestion, as there was only one runway and a single taxiway. Aircraft had to backtrack on the runway to position for takeoff. Thick fog quickly rolled in, reducing visibility to near zero. The air traffic controllers had no ground radar, making it difficult to manage aircraft movements and providing a major contributing factor to the disaster. A critical series of miscommunications between the KLM captain, Pan Am crew, and air traffic control occurred. The KLM captain, believing he had received clearance for takeoff, began accelerating down the runway, while the Pan Am plane was still taxiing on the same runway in dense fog. The Pan Am crew noticed the KLM plane approaching them and tried to turn off the runway, but it was too late. The KLM plane attempted to take off over the Pan Am jet, but the lower fuselage of the KLM aircraft struck the Pan Am plane, leading to a fiery explosion. All 248 passengers and crew aboard the KLM flight perished. Of the 396 people aboard the Pan Am flight, only 61 survived, many of whom were seated in the forward section of the aircraft, which was less impacted by the collision. Human error was the primary cause, especially the premature takeoff by the KLM captain. Make sure to check out our other videos and don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our latest content. See you in the next video.